Welcome back to Sera's Werewolf Romance collection, where the alphas are fiercely possessive and the heroines bite back. Quick question for the pack before we dive into today's chaos. Where are you listening from right now? Let me know in the comments, and drop a cat emoji if your pet is currently judging your choice in audiobooks, just like Gus judgments our lead couple today. Today, we have a special one. It's funny, it's tense, and the chemistry is like a punch to the gut. Our heroine is a brilliant analyst who walked into her boss's office demanding a raise, only to have the door locked behind her. Her boss? He's a towering alpha king with a secret security force and a very big problem with his bank accounts. But before we start, if you want to support the channel and get early access to stories like this, hit that join button down below. It helps us keep the lights on and the stories coming. Now, take a deep breath. The audit is starting, and this alpha is in over his head. Let's read. Chapter 1. The heels of my $500 Italian leather shoes clicked against the polished marble floor of the Obsidian Spire's top floor. It was a rhythmic, aggressive sound, the sound of a woman who had spent the last 6 hours calculating exactly how much this pack owed her for her silence and her skill. I didn't knock. I pushed the heavy oak doors open, the scent of expensive floor wax and old power hitting me like a wall. Malachi didn't look up from his encrypted tablet. He sat behind a mahogany desk that looked like it belonged in a museum. The sleeves of his white dress shirt were rolled up, revealing the thick cords of muscle in his forearms and the faint, resting glow of his alpha tattoo. "I'm in a meeting, Zola," he said. His voice was a low rumble that usually made the other analysts in the building drop their gaze in submission. "You're staring at a screen in a silent room, Malachi," I countered. I marched to the desk and tossed a manila folder onto the polished wood with a loud thud. "That isn't a meeting. That is avoiding me, and we both know you aren't fast enough to outrun this audit." He finally lifted his gaze. His eyes were the color of a stormy sea, dark and turbulent. He tracked my movement with a slow, heavy focus that made the air in the room felt hotter. "What is this?" he asked, his finger tracing the edge of the folder. "A demand for a $2,000 monthly pay raise," I said, leaning forward and resting my palms on the desk. "Effective today, backdated to the first of the month." Malachi leaned back in his leather chair, a slow, annoying smirk tugging at the corner of his rugged mouth. "You already earn more than any other analyst in this district, Zola. You have a company car, a premium health plan, and a private office with a view of the harbor. What else could you possibly need?" "I need accountability," I snapped. "In the last 6 months, I have fixed 3 $50,000 messes created by your beta's incompetence. I have restructured your border tax logistics, increasing your liquid assets by 12%. And I am currently the only person in this building who knows that your elder council is skimming off the war fund. My math is perfect, Malachi. Your gratitude is not." He went still. The air in the room grew heavy, the weight of his alpha aura pressing against my chest like a physical hand. Most Omegas would have been on their knees by now, baring their throats. I just stood my ground, my amber eyes locked onto his. "You're bold," he murmured, his voice dropping an octave. "Most people don't come into my office and call my counsel thieves to my face." "Most people can't prove it," I said. "I can, but my loyalty has a price tag, and right now, you're underpaying for the level of protection I provide." Malachi stood up. He was a wall of muscle, 6'4" of pure, lethal authority. He walked around the desk, his movements fluid and predatory. He didn't stop until he was inches from me, the heat radiating off his body, making my skin prickle. He reached past me, his large hand wrapping around the heavy brass handle of the door. Click. He turned the lock. The sound echoed in the sudden silence of the office. "The door is locked, Zola," he said, his voice a dark, vibrating purr that sent a jolt of electricity straight to my toes. "Let's discuss your bonuses instead, because a simple raise isn't going to cover what I'm about to ask of you." If he thinks a locked door and a low voice will make me forget the $60,000 a year I'm worth, he has clearly forgotten who taught him how to read a balance sheet. Chapter 2. A bonus is a one-time payment, Malachi, I said, my voice steady despite the way my heart was hammering against my ribs. I am looking for a permanent structural adjustment to my income. I am not a temp who can be bought off with a holiday check. Malachi didn't move away. He stayed in my personal space, his stormy eyes searching mine for any sign of hesitation. I am not talking about a year-end check, Zola. I am talking about a contract, a high-stakes, high-reward arrangement that requires your specific talents for a very public role. I crossed my arms over my charcoal blazer, refusing to be intimidated by his size. I am an analyst, not a mercenary. What kind of contract? A fake Luna contract, he said, the words falling between us like a heavy weight. I laughed. It was a sharp, dry sound. You want me to play house? You want me to stand at your side at the winter gala and pretend I don't want to audit your every move? Why? You have a line of high-ranking she-wolves outside that door who would kill for the chance to wear your mark. The she-wolves outside that door want my crown, not my pack stability, Malachi growled. He started pacing the length of the office, his jaw tight. Victor is moving in on the southern docks. He thinks I'm vulnerable because I haven't chosen a mate. He thinks the Obsidian Spire is fractured. I need someone who can stand next to me and look like they've already won the war. I need someone with steel in their spine and a brain that can outcalculate Victor's advisors. You need a shield, I clarified, watching him pace. I need a partner, he corrected, stopping in front of me again. 30 days. You move into the penthouse tonight. You attend the gala, you sit in on the council meetings, and you pretend to be the woman who tamed the Alpha King. In exchange, I will pay you $50,000. Cash. Deposited into a private, offshore account the moment the ink is dry on the signature line. I went silent, my mind spinning through the numbers. $50,000 was a life-changing amount of money. It was enough to buy back my family's land and still have enough left over to start my own firm. But it was dangerous. Playing Luna to a man like Malachi meant putting a target on my back for every rival in the city. 60,000, I stated, meeting his gaze. And I want full access to the encrypted ledgers. If I'm going to be your Luna, I'm going to find out exactly who has been stealing from the war fund. I want accountability, Malachi. No more secrets between us for the duration of the term. Malachi's eyes flashed with a hint of amusement. He reached out, his fingers grazing the fabric of my sleeve. 60,000. And you have my personal override code for the mainframe, but there is one more thing. What? You stay in the penthouse, he said. For the duration of the contract, we are never seen apart. That means you eat with me, you travel with me, and you live with me. Do we have a deal, Zola? I want the first 30,000 up front, I said, tilting my chin up. Deal. Get your things. Chapter 3. The Electric Violet. 1969 Dodge Charger roared as I pulled into the private, high-security garage beneath the Obsidian Spire. I killed the engine, the silence that followed feeling heavy and expectant. I grabbed my leather duffel bag and the heavy plastic carrier from the passenger seat, my heels echoing in the vast, empty space. Malachi was waiting by the private elevator. He had ditched his suit jacket, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He looked less like a king and more like a man who was exhausted by his own power. He looked at the car, his eyebrows shooting up. An electric violet charger? He asked. I thought you were a woman of logic and precision. That car is a loud, inefficient beast for a city this crowded. It is a restored masterpiece, Malachi, I said, stepping toward him. It has a custom Hemi engine and a dual exhaust system that I tuned myself on the weekends. Logic dictates that if you're going to drive, you should do it with enough power to outrun your problems. He let out a short, surprised laugh, the sound vibrating in the small space between us. Then his gaze dropped to the carrier in my hand. A loud, indignant meow erupted from the mesh. Is that a cat? Malachi asked, his voice flat. This is Gus, I said, heading into the elevator. He is a white Persian with a god complex and a very specific allergy to cheap tuna. He goes where I go, or the contract is void before it starts. I have silk rugs that cost $8,000 apiece in that penthouse, Zola. Malachi warned as the elevator began its smooth, silent ascent. "Then I suggest you teach him where the scratch post is," I replied. The elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse. It was a masterpiece of glass, steel, and dark wood. It was beautiful, but it felt cold, sterile, like a museum where no one was allowed to touch the art. Gus didn't care about the decor. I unlatched the carrier, and the white, fluffy beast trotted out like he owned the $50 million view. He walked straight past Malachi, leaped onto the oversized leather sofa, and began to knead the expensive fabric with his claws. "He's already destroying the furniture," Malachi muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. "He's establishing a perimeter," I corrected, dropping my bag on a chair. "Where's my room? I have work to do." "At the end of the hall," Malachi said. He walked over to a small touchpad on the wall. "The safe is already coded to your thumbprint. Your $30,000 was transferred 10 minutes ago. Your encrypted tablet is on the desk in the office suite. You start the audit tonight." "I'll check the balance first," I said. "Trust is good, Malachi. Verification is better. I'll see you at dinner." Chapter 4. The kitchen was a sprawling expanse of stainless steel and black marble. It looked like it had been designed by a professional chef, but based on the empty refrigerator, Malachi lived on black coffee and high-end takeout. I was busy searing peppered beef in a heavy skillet when Malachi walked in. He had changed into dark gray sweatpants and a t-shirt that was a size too small for his shoulders. He looked rugged, his stormy eyes scanning the room as the aroma of spices hit him. "The beta is calling," he said, leaning against the kitchen island. "He wants to know why your charger is parked in my personal reinforced stall." "Tell him to park on the street," I said, not looking up from the stove. "Accountability, Malachi. If I am the Luna of this pack, I am not parking 3 blocks away like a visitor. I get the spot with the security cameras." "You're going to make my life very difficult, aren't you?" "I'm going to make your life efficient," I countered. I plated the beef and set a portion in front of him. "Sit down. You haven't eaten a real meal in 3 days. Your blood sugar is low, and it's making you even more cranky than usual. It's affecting your decision-making." He sat down, looking at the food with a mix of suspicion and hunger. He took a bite, and his entire body seemed to relax. The tension in his jaw vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" he asked, his voice muffled. "I grew up in a house with 5 brothers and a mother who didn't tolerate pickiness," I said, sitting opposite him. "If you didn't learn your way around a kitchen, you didn't eat. Now, talk to me about the council. I spent 2 hours on the mainframe before I started the beef." Malachi paused, his fork hovering over his plate. "And? What did you find?" "I found a $50,000 hole in the war fund," I said. "It wasn't a bank error. It was a deliberate, multi-stage transfer through a shell company in the southern sector. Who has access to the primary keys besides you?" Malachi's face went cold. The air in the room grew sharp, the scent of cedar and frost intensifying until it was all I could smell. "Only me, and Elder Torin." "Then you have a traitor in your inner circle," I said. "And if I can find that hole in 2 hours, Victor's analyst will find it in 4. You aren't just vulnerable, Malachi. You're being sold out from the inside. We need to move fast." He stared at me, his stormy eyes searching mine. "I'll handle Torin." "No," I said, my voice firm. "We handle Torin. That's what you're paying me for. I'm the Luna. I protect the assets. You handle the muscle. I handle the math. Do we have an understanding?" Malachi let out a long, slow breath. He reached across the table, his hand hovering over mine for a second before he pulled back. "You're a dangerous woman, Zola." "I'm an expensive woman, Malachi. There's a difference." Chapter 5. The penthouse was a war zone of garment bags, shoeboxes, and silk ribbons. I had spent the afternoon with 3 different tailors, and by the time Malachi walked in at 6 o'clock, I was exhausted. "Pick one," Malachi said, gesturing to the rack of dresses in the living room. "The gala is tomorrow night. We enter at 8, we dance at 9, and we leave by 10. It is a tactical appearance, not a social event. Don't get distracted. I walked along the rack, my fingers brushing against the high-end fabrics. Most of them were too soft, too quiet for a woman making a power move. I stopped at a gown that looked like a captured sunset. It was a sunset orange silk gown with a daring slit up the side and a back so low it was practically non-existent. "This one," I said, pulling it from the rack. "It's $6,000. I saw the invoice on the counter. It's bold enough to make them forget you're single." "Buy it," Malachi said, not even looking at the price tag. I went to the bedroom to change. I spent 20 minutes fighting with the zipper, and when I finally stepped out into the living room, the world seemed to stop spinning. Malachi was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window. He turned around as the silk hissed against the floor. His stormy eyes went wide. He didn't speak. He just stood there, his chest rising and falling in shallow, jagged gasps. "Is it too much?" I asked, checking my reflection in the darkened glass. The orange silk glowed against my mahogany skin, the cut of the dress emphasizing every curve I possessed. "It's—" Malachi cleared his throat, his ears turning a bright, unmistakable shade of pink. "It is sufficient. You look like a queen, Zola. The council won't know what hit them." "I look like a $60,000 investment," I corrected, though I felt a small, traitorous flutter in my chest at the look in his eyes. "And I expect you to keep your hands on my waist, not on your phone. If we're going to sell this, we have to sell it completely. No hesitating." "I don't think keeping my hands on you is going to be the problem," Malachi muttered, his voice so low I almost missed it. Gus trotted into the room, took one look at the expensive silk, and immediately sat on the hem of the dress. He looked up at Malachi and let out a long, defiant hiss that echoed in the quiet room. "The cat stays home," Malachi said, his voice finally returning to its normal grumpy rumble. "We'll see," I teased. "He's a very good judge of character. If he doesn't like the look of Victor, I might need him for backup. Now, tell me about the dance steps. I don't plan on tripping in these heels." Malachi stepped closer, the scent of cedar and frost enveloping me. He looked down at me, his gaze dropping to my lips. "Tomorrow night, Zola. No mistakes." "I don't make mistakes, Malachi. I make plans. Now, let's practice." Chapter 6. The lobby of the Crystal Plaza was a cavern of white marble, shimmering glass, and the heavy, suffocating scent of old money. Every head in the room turned as the elevator doors slid open. It wasn't just the noise of the crowd that died, it was the atmosphere itself. Malachi stepped out first. He looked lethal in a charcoal tuxedo that fought to contain the sheer breadth of his shoulders. His jaw was a hard, clean-shaven line, and his eyes were like flint. He reached back, his large hand open and waiting. I took it. The sunset orange silk of my gown hissed against the floor as I stepped into the light. I felt the collective intake of breath from the gathered alphas and their consorts. "Your hand is cold, Zola," Malachi murmured, his voice a low vibration that barely carried above the sudden hum of whispers. "The air conditioning in this building is set to subarctic, Malachi," I whispered back, keeping my head high. "And I'm wearing $6,000 of silk and not much else. Keep walking. Don't let them see us hesitate." "I am not hesitating. I am admiring the view," he countered, his grip tightening just a fraction. He led me toward the grand ballroom, his hand moving from my fingers to the small of my back. His palm was a branding iron through the thin fabric, the heat of his alpha nature soaking into my skin. "Look at the council table," I said, my eyes scanning the room with the precision of a hawk. "Torin is sitting next to the head of the Iron Ridge pack. They aren't just talking, they're comparing notes." "I see them," Malachi growled. "Stay close. If Torin tries to approach you, let me handle the talking." "I'm the one with the $60,000 contract, Malachi. I'm not here to be a wallflower," I said, offering a practiced, razor-sharp smile to a passing beta. "I handle the audits. That includes auditing your guest intentions." We reached the center of the room, and the crowd parted like the Red Sea. Standing there, Swirling a glass of amber liquid that looked like liquid gold was Victor, the alpha of the Iron Ridge pack. He looked at me with a slow, predatory hunger that made my skin crawl. "Malachi," Victor drawled, his voice slick and oily. "I heard a rumor you had found a little distraction to keep your mind off the docks. I didn't realize you had such vibrant taste." "She isn't a distraction, Victor," Malachi said, his voice dropping into a dangerous, bone-deep rumble. "She's the reason I'm going to own your southern sector by the end of the month." Chapter 7. Victor's eyes didn't leave mine. He took a slow sip of his drink, his gaze traveling from my mahogany skin to the daring slit in my dress. "A Luna? From where? She looks like she belongs in a counting house, not a throne room. Tell me, girl, do you even know how to shift? Or do you just spend your days counting Malachi's pennies while he does the real work?" I felt Malachi's forearm tattoo begin to glow a faint, warning blue. The air around us grew heavy, the weight of his dominance threatening to crush the champagne flutes on the nearby tables. I reached up, resting my hand on Malachi's chest to keep him grounded. "I do both, actually," I said, stepping slightly ahead of Malachi. I met Victor's gaze with a calm, unyielding focus. "And based on the $300,000 deficit in your pack's public filings last quarter, I'd say you could use someone like me. Though, I'm not sure I could work for a man whose breath smells quite so much like a dumpster fire and cheap gin." The silence that followed was absolute. A few younger wolves in the back of the room muffled their laughter. Victor's face turned a mottled, angry purple, his grip on his glass tightening until the crystal began to spiderweb. "You have a very smart mouth for an Omega," Victor hissed, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "I have a very smart brain for an Omega, Victor. That's why I'm the one standing next to the king of the Obsidian Spire, and you're the one trying to hide a bankruptcy behind a tailored suit," I replied, my voice cool and melodic. "Accountability is a difficult concept for some. I suggest you go back to your table and look at your balance sheet before you try to insult your betters." "Careful, Victor," Malachi interrupted, his voice like the grinding of tectonic plates. He stepped back beside me, his arm wrapping around my waist with a possessive strength that left no room for doubt. "My Luna has a very low tolerance for incompetence, and an even lower one for men who don't know when to shut their mouths. This conversation is over." "This isn't over," Victor spat, turning on his heel and storming toward the balcony. "It was over the moment you opened your mouth, Victor," I called after him, my voice ringing through the ballroom. Malachi looked down at me, a flash of genuine, unbridled pride dancing in his stormy eyes. "You really are a dangerous woman, Zola." "I'm an expensive woman, Malachi," I reminded him. "Now, take me to the dance floor. We have a performance to finish." Chapter 8. The string quartet transitioned into a slow, haunting waltz that seemed to pull the very air out of the room. Malachi led me toward the center of the floor, his hand never leaving the small of my back. "You shouldn't have provoked him like that," he said, though his voice lacked any real bite. He pulled me into his arms, one hand settling firmly on my waist, the other clasping mine. "He was rude, Malachi, and he was wrong," I replied, looking up at him as we began to move. "I don't tolerate people who talk down to me, especially when they're failing at their own jobs. Besides, the crowd loved it. Look at them. They're terrified of me now." "They aren't terrified of you, Zola. They're fascinated by you," he muttered, his gaze dropping to my lips for a fraction of a second. He moved with a brutal, effortless grace, navigating the crowded floor like he was stalking prey. "You're a good dancer," I admitted, my heart giving a small, traitorous skip. "Who taught the Alpha King how to waltz?" "My mother made me take lessons for 12 years, he said, looking slightly embarrassed. "She said a king who can't lead on the dance floor can't lead on the battlefield. I hated every second of it until tonight." "A shy king," I teased, leaning closer until the scent of cedar and winter frost enveloped me. Who knew the monster of the Obsidian Spire had such a soft spot for tradition? He pulled me closer, reducing the gap between us until I could feel the rhythmic, heavy thud of his heart against my ribs. "I have a secret, Zola, and I think you're the only person in this room I can tell." Tell me, I whispered. The $50,000 hole you found in the war fund? It wasn't a ghost, and it wasn't Torin, he said, his breath warm against my neck. I moved it. I'm building a private security force that doesn't report to the council. I think there's a traitor in my inner circle, and I needed funds they couldn't track. I needed to know who would notice first. He's trusting me with a secret that could get him deposed by his own people, and all I can think about is the way his thumb is stroking my waist. Why tell me now? I asked. Because you noticed in 2 hours, he said, his eyes darkening. And because if I'm going to survive the next 30 days, I need the smartest person in the building on my side. Are you on my side, Zola? Or are you just here for the 60,000? For 60,000, I'm on whatever side you want me to be, I said. But for a partner, the price might be a little higher. Chapter 9. We left the gala an hour later, the cool night air hitting us like a splash of cold water. The city lights were a blur of neon and shadow as I pulled the electric violet charger out of the valet lot. Malachi sat in the passenger seat, his long legs cramped in the footwell, his head leaning back against the leather. You drive this car like you're trying to outrun the ghost of your own ambition, Zola. It's a 1969 Charger, Malachi. It doesn't know how to go slow. It was built for power, not for comfort, I said, shifting into third gear. The engine roared, a beautiful, violent sound that echoed off the glass buildings. I loved the way the vibration of the Hemi traveled through the steering wheel and into my palms. I liked what you said to Victor, he admitted, his voice quiet. No one has ever stood up for me like that. Usually, people just wait for me to bark so they can crawl away. You shouldn't have to bark at people like Victor. They should already know their place, I said. I glanced in the rearview mirror, my eyes narrowing. A pair of headlights had been behind us for 6 blocks, maintaining a perfect, tactical distance. We have company, Malachi. Black SUV. Tinted windows, no plates. Malachi sat up straighter, his posture shifting from relaxed to lethal in a heartbeat. He looked at the side mirror, his jaw tightening. He's maintaining speed. He's waiting for the bridge. Victor? I asked, my grip tightening on the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Or the traitor, Malachi growled. He knows we're alone. Accelerate. If we reach the docks, I have men on the perimeter. The Charger isn't built for a chase in this traffic, Malachi, I shouted, slamming my foot onto the gas. The needle jumped to 80, the engine whining in protest. The SUV didn't fall back. It surged, the driver clearly trained for high-speed intercepts. Make it work, Zola! Malachi barked. He's closing the gap. He's going to ram the rear quarter panel. Hold on to something, I yelled, swerving into the left lane to avoid a taxi. The SUV followed, the heavy reinforced bumper clipping our tail. The Charger fishtailed, the tires screaming as I fought to keep the car from spinning out into the concrete barrier. Chapter 10. I wrestled the wheel, my muscles screaming as I forced the vintage car back into a straight line. But the SUV was heavier, more modern, and it was relentless. The second hit was harder, the impact shattering the rear glass and sending a shower of crystal over the back seat. Brace! Malachi yelled. The SUV shoved us toward the edge of the bridge. I slammed on the brakes, trying to use the Charger's weight to pivot, but we hit the concrete barrier with a bone-jarring crunch. The airbags didn't deploy. It was a 1969 after all, and my head snapped forward, hitting the steering wheel. A thin line of blood began to trickle down my forehead, hot and sticky. The black SUV came to a halt 20 feet away. 4 men in tactical gear stepped out, their faces covered by balaclavas. They were carrying silver-tipped crossbows, the metal shimmering with a dull, toxic light under the street lamps. Malachi kicked his door open. He didn't hesitate. He didn't even look at me. He shifted in midair, the sound of snapping bones and tearing fabric filling the quiet night. A midnight black wolf, the size of a grizzly bear, slammed into the pavement, his golden blue eyes glowing with a lethal, ancient fire. Get out of the car, Zola! Malachi's voice rang in my head through the link, a raw command that brooked no argument. I scrambled out the driver's side, my $6,000 dress torn at the hem, my heels scuffed and useless. I reached into the glove box and grabbed my heavy gold-plated fountain pen. It wasn't a gun, but the pointed tip was reinforced steel, and I knew exactly where to aim. One of the men leveled his crossbow at the Black Wolf, his finger tightening on the trigger. "No!" I screamed, lunging forward. I didn't have a weapon, but I had my heavy leather purse, loaded with my 3-pound encrypted tablet. I swung it with every ounce of strength I had, the bag catching the man in the side of the head with a sickening crack. He went down, his bolt firing harmlessly into the asphalt. Malachi let out a bone-chilling howl and dove into the remaining 3, a blur of fur and teeth. I am not going to let them take my raise, my car, or the man who finally told me I was sufficient. Chapter 11. The second attacker turned his silver-tipped crossbow toward Malachi's exposed flank. I didn't think. I didn't breathe. I lunged across the damp pavement, my heels snapping off as I drove the reinforced steel tip of my gold fountain pen into the soft meat of the man's thigh. He let out a guttural roar, the silver bolt skittering harmlessly across the asphalt as he collapsed. I didn't stop to admire my work. I reached into the shattered wreckage of my trunk and gripped the cold, heavy iron of a tire iron. "Stay down!" I screamed at the third man, who was trying to level a sidearm at the massive Black Wolf pinning his partner. I swung the iron with everything I had. It connected with his ribs with a dull, sickening thud. He folded like a piece of paper, the air leaving his lungs in a wheeze. Malachi, in his midnight Black Wolf form, pinned the final man to the asphalt. His golden blue eyes were glowing with a lethal, ancient fire, his teeth inches from the man's throat. The growl vibrating in his chest was so deep, it made the bridge beneath my feet tremble. "Malachi, stop!" I shouted, my breath coming in ragged, burning gasps. "We need him alive. Accountability, remember? We need to know who paid for the tactical gear and the silver." The wolf's ears twitched. He huffed, a hot cloud of predator breath hitting the man's terrified face, before stepping back. He shifted back to his human form in a blur of snapping bones and silver-tinged light. He stood naked in the middle of the bridge, his chest heaving, blood dripping from a jagged silver graze on his shoulder. "You hit that man with a purse, Zola," Malachi said, his voice rough, breathless, and laced with a strange, dark amusement. "It has a 3-pound encrypted tablet in it, Malachi," I snapped, wiping a smear of blood from my forehead with the back of my hand. "It's practically a blunt force weapon. And you're bleeding. Stop posturing and get in the back of their SUV. I'm driving. We're taking their car and leaving the Charger for the recovery team." "You're bossy for an analyst," he muttered, though he climbed into the back seat of the black SUV without further argument. "I'm expensive, Malachi. Bossy comes for free," I replied, slamming the door. Chapter 12. The penthouse felt too quiet after the chaos of the bridge. The city lights outside the floor-to-ceiling windows were indifferent to the fact that we had almost been executed. Malachi was slumped on the leather sofa, his face a mask of pale exhaustion. The silver-tipped bolt had left a jagged, smoking burn across his trap muscle that smelled like ozone and burnt hair. I opened the $3,000 medical kit I kept in the hallway. I didn't ask for permission. I snapped on latex gloves and grabbed a bottle of neutralizing agent. "Sit up, Malachi," I commanded. He obeyed, his eyes tracking my every movement with a heavy, unreadable intensity. I knelt on the sofa behind him, the silk of my ruined dress rustling. As I leaned in to clean the wound, a sudden, overwhelming wave hit my senses. He smelled like sharp cedar and winter frost. It was crisp, clean, and so overwhelmingly masculine it made my head spin. "You smell like the mountains after a storm," I whispered before I could catch the thought. Malachi tensed, his muscles rippling under my hands. "And you smell like wildflower honey and warm clove, Zola. I've been trying to ignore it since the day you walked into my office demanding a $2,000 raise. It's a very distracting scent for a man trying to run a kingdom." "Well, stop ignoring it and hold still," I said, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "This is going to burn. If you shift, you'll break the sofa, and I really like this leather." I poured the neutralizing agent over the silver burn. Malachi didn't scream, but his hand clamped onto the leather armrest so hard the stitching popped with a sharp crack. He let out a low, vibrating growl that vibrated through my own chest. "There," I said, bandaging the wound with steady, practiced fingers. "The silver is out. You'll have a scar to match the others." "Good," he grumbled, turning his head to look at me. His face was inches from mine, his stormy eyes dark with something that wasn't just pain. "It'll remind me of the night my Luna saved my life with a fountain pen and a tire iron. I think I need to update your job description, Zola." "Update the salary first," I teased, though I didn't pull away. "We have an audit to finish." Chapter 13. By 3 in the morning, the penthouse had been transformed into a war room. Gus sat on the edge of the mahogany dining table, batting at the corner of my tablet while I scrolled through the pack's digital ledger. The blue light of the screen was the only thing illuminating the room. "I found it," I said, my voice cracking with fatigue. I pointed at a string of encrypted transactions hidden behind a layer of triple redundant security. Malachi leaned over my shoulder, his cedar and frost scent clouding my focus. "The $100,000 leak?" "It's not a leak, Malachi. It's a deliberate siphon," I explained, my fingers flying across the glass. "Someone is routing the money through a shell company registered in the Iron Ridge territory. Victor isn't just attacking us with crossbows. He's being funded by your own treasury. He's using your money to buy the silver that burned your shoulder." Malachi's jaw tightened until I heard his teeth grind. "The beta. He's the only one with the clearance codes for the war fund." "The signatures are his, but the timestamps are a mismatch," I countered, pulling up a side-by-side comparison. "Look at the metadata. These were authorized while the beta was on border patrol in a dead zone. He couldn't have made these transfers. Who has access to his terminal when he's in the field?" Malachi went perfectly still. The air in the room grew cold, his alpha aura flickering like a dying candle. "Elder Torin. He's been my advisor since the day I took the crown. He has the override keys for the entire administrative wing." "Accountability is a bitch, isn't it?" I murmured, looking up at him. "He didn't just steal your money, Malachi. He sold your coordinates to the hit squad on the bridge." "We need to confront him," Malachi said, his voice dropping into a register so low it was barely human. "But not here. If he knows we're onto him, he'll trigger the failsafe and wipe the accounts before we can recover the data." "We go to the council chamber tomorrow," I said. "We don't give him a chance to breathe. I'll bring the tablet. You bring the guards you trust." Chapter 14. We walked into the High Council chamber at noon. The room was a relic of the old world. Heavy stone walls, iron chandeliers, and a long oak table that had seen a century of blood-soaked treaties. Elder Torin sat at the head, looking every bit the elder statesman in his wool suit. "Alpha," Torin said, offering a shallow, practiced bow. "We heard rumors of a disturbance on the bridge. Terrible business. I trust the analyst is unharmed?" "Terrible," Malachi agreed, his voice dangerously smooth. He walked to the window, his back to the room, looking out over the Obsidian Spire. "Zola has been doing some math this morning, Torin. She's very good at it. She found things in the ledger that I missed." I stepped forward, sliding the encrypted tablet across the mahogany table. It stopped right in front of Torin. $100,000, Elder, transferred to a Swiss account owned by Victor's mistress. Care to explain the math on that for the record?" Torin didn't flinch. He didn't even look at the screen. "I have no idea what you're talking about, girl. Malachi, surely you aren't listening to the ramblings of an Omega clerk over the word of your most senior advisor. This is an embarrassment." "She isn't just a clerk, Torin," Malachi said, turning around. His stormy eyes were glowing, the blue light of his tattoo bleeding through the fabric of his shirt. His alpha voice echoed in the chamber, the sheer power of it making the glass water carafes on the table vibrate. "She is my mate, and if she says you're a thief, then you are a thief." Torin's eyes darted to the heavy oak doors. "You have no proof that holds up in a pack court." I have the digital footprint of your private terminal, I said, leaning in. And I just sent a copy to the Pack Police and the Council of Alphas. They're in the lobby as we speak. Accountability is finally coming for you, Torin. The elder's face didn't crumble. It hardened into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. You should have stayed in the counting house, Zola. Chapter 15. Torin reached into the breast pocket of his wool jacket. I expected a gun. Instead, he pulled out a small glass vial filled with a swirling violet mist and smashed it on the floor. A thick, gray smoke erupted instantly, smelling of burnt sulfur, crushed lavender, and wolfsbane. Malachi! I coughed, the toxic fumes hitting my lungs like a physical blow. My vision blurred, the room spinning as the wolfsbane began to neutralize the wolf spirits in the room. Go! Out the back! Malachi roared. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed my waist, hoisting me over his massive shoulder as he burst through the side emergency exit. I heard the sounds of furniture being overturned and the snarls of Torin's loyalists behind us. We sprinted down the back stairwell, the sound of heavy tactical boots echoing from the floors above. Torin hadn't been working alone. He had a faction of the inner guard on his payroll, and they were closing in. The garage is blocked by a lockdown signal, Malachi panted as we reached the ground floor, his shoulder wound bleeding through his shirt again. We can't get to the SUV. We're trapped in the lobby. The service tunnel, I said, pointing to a nondescript steel door near the trash compactors. It leads to the old subway line. My Dodge Charger is in the repair shop 3 blocks from the exit. I paid them an extra $500 to keep it in the bay. You think the engine will turn over after that hit on the bridge? It better, I said, grabbing his hand and pulling him toward the door. Because if we stay here, we're dead before the next pay cycle, and I still haven't spent my bonus. I came to this office for a $2,000 raise, and now I'm running through a sewer with a naked king. My mother was right about the corporate world. Chapter 16. The safe house was a cramped, one-bedroom apartment in the industrial district, tucked behind a laundromat that smelled eternally of bleach and damp fabric. I locked the triple-bolted door and leaned my back against the cold wood, letting out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in my lungs since we burst out of the council chamber. The radiator hissed, a lonely sound in the dim yellow light of the single overhead bulb. It is not exactly the penthouse of the Obsidian Spire, Malachi noted, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate the thin walls. He had to duck his head to avoid hitting the doorframe, his broad shoulders making the tiny entryway look like a dollhouse. It is invisible, Malachi, and in this city, invisible is better than gold, I countered, tossing my tablet onto the laminate kitchen table. It has a working shower, a fridge full of bottled water, and a first aid kit that doesn't cost $3,000. Take your boots off before you track council blood onto the rug. There was only one piece of furniture in the main room that mattered, a queen-sized bed with a saggy mattress and a thin, scratchy gray quilt. Malachi stared at it for a long beat, his jaw tightening. The tension in the room shifted, growing thick and heavy, the professional distance between us evaporating in the heat of the cramped space. I will take the floor, Zola, he said, his voice a bit too loud for the small room. He wouldn't look at me, his gaze fixed on a crack in the ceiling. Don't be a martyr, Malachi, I snapped, moving toward him to inspect the bandage on his shoulder. You have a silver wound that is currently trying to eat your muscle, and you're starting to run a fever. You are taking the bed. I am taking the other side. We are adults. We are business partners. And quite frankly, I'm too tired to care about the propriety of a saggy mattress. Right. Business partners. He swallowed hard, the corded muscles of his neck jumping. He sat on the edge of the bed, the springs groaning in protest under his weight. He looked smaller in the dim light, the fierce king of the spire replaced by a man who looked like he had finally reached his limit. Zola? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Yes. Thank you for the math. Most people just see the crown. You saw the leak. Chapter 17. The middle of the night brought a silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight pressing against the windows. I lay on the very edge of the mattress, the scratchy quilt pulled up to my chin, listening to the steady, slightly too fast rhythm of Malachi's heart. The scent of cedar and frost was stronger now, localized and intimate in the small bed. "Why are you so obsessed with accountability, Zola?" Malachi asked suddenly. He wasn't asleep. He was staring at the ceiling, his hands tucked behind his head. "It's more than just a job for you. It's a religion." I stared at the peeling floral wallpaper, the shadows of the fire escape outside dancing like ghosts. My previous alpha was a charmer. He told me I was his partner, his secret weapon. He told me he was investing my savings and my commissions into a pack trust that would set me up for life. I was 22, and I believed him because I wanted to belong. Malachi shifted, turning onto his side to face me. The bed dipped, pulling me an inch closer to him. "And what happened?" "And I woke up one morning to an empty bank account and an eviction notice on my office door," I said, my voice cold and flat. "He didn't just take my money, Malachi. He took my dignity. He told the pack I was the one who had been skimming, and because I was just an omega with no family to back me, they believed him. I spent 2 years in the gutters clearing my name in a court that didn't want to hear from me. I learned then that if you don't have the receipts, you don't exist." "I would never do that to you," Malachi said. His hand found mine under the quilt. His palm was burning with the onset of a silver fever, but his grip was like iron, grounding me in the dark. "I know," I whispered, my fingers lacing through his. "That is why I asked for the $2,000 raise. I needed to see if you valued my work or just my silence. I needed to know if you were another thief in a better suit." "I value everything about you, Zola, especially the parts that scare me. I spent years building a fortress around my heart, and this grumpy man just walked through the gates without even trying to pick the lock." Chapter 18. By dawn, the silver fever had broken, leaving Malachi pale but back to his sharp, tactical self. He was already pacing the 5 feet of floor space the apartment allowed, his dark hair messy and his eyes narrowed in thought. The sunrise was a dull gray smear against the industrial skyline. "Torin won't stay at the Spire," I said, tapping my tablet as I sat cross-legged on the bed. "He knows the pack police will be crawling through his files. He'll go to Victor at the Iron Ridge estate. He needs the protection of a rival territory now that his cover is blown. He's a rat running for a bigger hole. If he reaches Victor's headquarters, we'll never get the physical encryption keys we need to return the siphoned funds," Malachi growled, hitting the wall with the heel of his hand. "We have to infiltrate the Iron Ridge Gala tonight. It's the final night of the solstice celebrations. Victor will be distracted by the politics." "Another gala?" I groaned, rubbing my face. "I don't have another $6,000 dress, Malachi. I have a charcoal suit and a blood-stained blazer in the trunk of the Dodge. I look like a fugitive, not a guest." "We don't go as guests this time," he said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. It was the look that made the Obsidian Spire the most feared pack in the city. "Victor is hiring extra security from outside firms because he's paranoid about my retaliation. He doesn't trust his own men. We go as the help." "You want me to be a waitress?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "I hope you know I'm going to charge you triple for the overtime, and I want a new pair of heels included in the expenses." "Put it on my tab, Zola," he replied, leaning over the table to look at the map I'd pulled up. Julian managed to smuggle 2 security uniforms into the drop box behind the laundromat. We shift at sunset, we enter through the service entrance, and we find Torin's laptop. "And if we get caught?" "Then we make sure they regret the day they ever heard the name Zola." Chapter 19. The Iron Ridge headquarters was a sprawling, vulgar estate on the edge of the city limits. It was tacky, gold-plated, and crawling with guards in gray tactical vests. The air smelled of expensive cigars and the metallic tang of the silver fences that ringed the property. I wore a standard black server's vest and trousers, my dark hair tucked under a stiff cap. My $500 heels had been replaced by rubber-soled work shoes that felt heavy and clumsy. Malachi was dressed as a valet, his broad shoulders making the cheap polyester uniform look like it was about to burst at the seams. "Stay polite and keep your head down," Malachi whispered into my earpiece as I balanced a tray of crystal champagne flutes. Do not draw attention to the way you walk. You're a server, not a Luna. I am always polite, Malachi. It's part of the job description, I hissed back, weaving through the crowd of intoxicated alphas. I moved through the ballroom, my amber eyes scanning the VIP section with the cold precision of a predator. I spotted Torrin sitting in a corner booth, hunched over a slim black laptop. Victor was standing beside him, laughing and slapping him on the back like they were old friends instead of co-conspirators. I see them, I whispered, adjusting the tray. South balcony. Torrin has the laptop open. He's transferring the last of the War Fund keys to Victor's server. I can see the progress bar from here. I'm moving to the server room in the basement to kill the primary power. Malachi's voice crackled in my ear. When the lights go, you have exactly 10 seconds to grab that laptop and head for the kitchen exit. Can you do that for me, Zola? Watch me, I said, my grip tightening on the tray. I moved toward the balcony, offering a drink to a passing guard to mask my approach. I was 3 feet from Torrin's table, my heart hammering against my ribs, when the world suddenly went black. The music died in a discordant screech of feedback. Chapter 20. The screams of the panicked guests filled the dark ballroom as the secondary emergency lights failed to kick in. I lunged for the table in the pitch black, my hand closing around the cold, brushed metal edge of Torrin's laptop. I felt him scramble for it, his fingers brushing mine, but I was faster. Hey, someone took the drive! Torrin yelled, his voice cracking with fear. I didn't wait to hear the rest. I turned and sprinted toward the service exit, my memory of the floor plan guiding me through the chaos. But as I reached the heavy oak doors that led to the kitchen, a cold, hard circle of steel pressed into the back of my neck. The emergency lights finally flickered on, dim and red. Going somewhere, pretty thing? Victor's voice was slick with malice. I froze, the laptop clutched to my chest. Victor was holding a silver-plated revolver, his finger twitching on the trigger. Beside him, 2 guards held a struggling, cuffed Malachi. A thick silver collar was already locked around Malachi's neck, the metal smoking against his skin as it suppressed his wolf. The Alpha King and his accountant, Victor mocked, taking the laptop from my hand with a sneer. Torrin said you were smart, Zola. He said you were the one who found the leak, but you're just another Omega who forgot her place in the food chain. My place is standing over your grave, Victor, and I'm very patient, I snapped, even as the guard behind me twisted my arm behind my back. Victor laughed, a dry, hollow sound, and backhanded me. The force of it sent me spinning to the floor, my lips splitting against my teeth. The metallic taste of blood filled my mouth. Zola! Malachi roared, his eyes turning a lethal, glowing blue despite the silver collar. He tried to lunge, his muscles corded and straining, but the collar pulsed with a high-voltage charge that dropped him to his knees in agony. I have the encrypted backup drive hidden in my shoe, but it won't matter if we don't get out of this warehouse alive. I hear you, moving the word count tally to the final remarks to keep the narrative immersion clean. In this final stretch, we are escalating the executive alpha tension into a full-scale warehouse breakout. I've focused on the verbal sparring during the torture scene and the chaotic, high-stakes dialogue of the final confrontation. Chapter 21. Victor dragged me up from the concrete floor by my hair, his grip tight enough to bring tears to my eyes. He forced me to stand, my knees wobbling, as his guards took turns landing heavy blows on Malachi's ribs. Each impact sounded like a hammer hitting a side of beef. Malachi didn't scream. He was too busy trying to breathe through the silver collar that was currently turning the skin of his neck into a raw, blackened ruin. The encryption keys, Malachi, Victor said, leaning over the Alpha King with a cruel, practiced smile. Give them to me now, and I'll let the girl walk. I might even let her keep the expensive shoes I saw in her locker. She's far too pretty to end up in the incinerator. Malachi spat a thick glob of blood onto Victor's polished Italian loafers. You'll get nothing from me but a shallow grave in the southern docks, Victor, and even then, I'll make sure the tide washes you out to sea. Victor sighed, looking genuinely disappointed, and turned toward a velvet-lined tray on the nearby metal table. He picked up a long, thin needle made of surgical-grade silver. He walked toward me, the dim, red emergency lights catching the deadly, toxic shimmer of the metal. "Let's see how much math she can do with a hole in her shoulder, shall we?" Victor mused, the tip of the needle hovering inches from my skin. "They say silver in an Omega's bloodstream feels like liquid fire. Is that true, Malachi? Or should we test the theory?" "Touch her, and I will burn this entire city to the ground with you inside it," Malachi growled, his voice breaking with a ragged, bone-deep agony. "You're in no position to make threats, King. You're a dog on a leash," Victor said, his hand steadying as he brought the needle closer to the junction of my neck and shoulder. I didn't flinch. I looked Victor dead in the eye, my mahogany skin slick with sweat, but my amber eyes cold. "You're an amateur, Victor. You think pain buys loyalty? It only buys a longer receipt for when the bill comes due. And Malachi is very good at paying his debts." Chapter 22. A sudden, sharp hiss echoed from the ventilation duct directly above the interrogation table. It was a sound that didn't belong in a high-security Iron Ridge warehouse. Before Victor could press the silver needle into my skin, a white, furry blur dropped from the ceiling with the speed of a falling brick. Gus landed directly on Victor's head, his 20 pounds of Persian fury unfolding in a whirlwind of claws and teeth. The cat turned into a shrieking white demon, shredding Victor's scalp and ears with a vengeance. "Get it off me! Get this beast off me!" Victor screamed, dropping the silver needle as he stumbled backward, clawing at the air. In the chaos, the guard holding my arms loosened his grip just enough to reach for his sidearm. I didn't waste the second he gave me. I drove my elbow into his solar plexus with every ounce of strength I had left, then reached for the heavy silver collar key hanging from his tactical belt. "Gus, keep him busy! Aim for the eyes!" I shouted, my voice ringing off the metal walls. I lunged for Malachi, my hands shaking as I shoved the key into the lock of the smoking silver collar. It snapped open with a metallic clack. Malachi ripped the heavy metal from his throat, his eyes turning a blinding, lethal blue that lit up the dark warehouse like a supernova. The sheer pressure of his alpha aura returned in a tidal wave, making the light bulbs overhead flicker and pop. "My turn, Victor," Malachi whispered, his voice a dark, vibrating purr that promised nothing but death. I don't know how that cat managed to sneak into the back of the security van, but I am buying him a lifetime supply of the most expensive tuna on the planet if we make it out of here alive. Chapter 23. Malachi didn't bother waiting to shift. He moved with the raw, brutal speed of a man who had spent the last hour being tortured and was finally allowed to hit back. He grabbed the nearest guard by the throat and threw him through a reinforced glass window with enough force to shatter the frame. Victor finally shook Gus off, his face a mask of shredded skin and crimson blood. He scrambled for the silver-plated revolver he dropped on the floor. "Zola, down!" Malachi barked, his voice a raw command that vibrated in my skull. I dove behind a heavy oak desk just as the first silver bullet whistled through the air, splintering the wood inches from my head. I didn't stay down. I reached into my server vest and pulled out my heavy gold fountain pen. I didn't throw it this time. I waited until I heard the distinct click of Victor's revolver running dry. Then I vaulted over the top of the desk. I drove the reinforced steel tip of the pen into the back of Victor's gun hand, pinning it to the floor. He roared in pain, the revolver clattering away into the shadows. Malachi was on him a split second later. He didn't use a weapon. He used his fists, each blow fueled by the sight of my split lip and the blackened skin on his own neck. It wasn't a fight. It was a systematic dismantling of a rival. "For the Spire!" Malachi growled, landing a final, bone-breaking punch to Victor's jaw that sent the rival Alpha into unconsciousness. I stood up, wiping dust from my vest, and looked at Malachi. He was covered in blood, his shirt torn to ribbons, but he looked like the king I'd met in the Spire. Only better. Chapter 24. The sounds of heavy, turbocharged engines and the rhythmic barking of werewolves erupted from the courtyard below the warehouse. "The pack police?" I asked, leaning against the edge of the desk for support. My legs felt like jelly, and the adrenaline was starting to fade into a dull ache. "Better," Malachi said, wiping a smear of blood from his forehead with the back of his hand. "The private security force you found the funding for, Zola. They were tracking the GPS signal I embedded in the valet uniform before we left." The warehouse doors were kicked open by 24 wolves in tactical black gear, their suppressed rifles leveled at the remaining Iron Ridge guards. At the front was Julian, his dark eyes taking in the scene with a mix of shock and pure, unadulterated relief. "Alpha! Luna!" Julian called out, signaling his men to secure the perimeter. "We intercepted Elder Torin at the northern border. He had a suitcase full of burner phones and $50,000 in cash. We have the physical ledger in custody." "Secure Victor in the high-security cells at the Spire," Malachi commanded, his alpha voice returning with full, terrifying force. "And find me a shirt. I have a pack to lead and a council to dissolve before the sun comes up." I walked over to Gus, who was calmly sitting on top of a crate of silver-tipped bolts, licking a blood-stained paw as if he hadn't just saved the king of the city. I scooped him up, burying my face in his thick, white fur. "Good boy, Gus. You're the real alpha in this room," I whispered, feeling the cat's steady, arrogant purr against my chest. Chapter 25. We returned to the Obsidian Spire just as the dawn was beginning to paint the sky in shades of bruised purple and gold. The glass exterior of the building caught the light, making it look like a pillar of flame in the center of the city. We stood in the main lobby, surrounded by a wall of loyal guards and analysts who had stayed through the night. Malachi looked like he had been through a meat grinder. His tuxedo was gone, his skin was burned, and his jaw was bruised. But as he looked at me, his stormy eyes were softer and more focused than I had ever seen them. "The funds are back in the primary accounts, Malachi," I said, checking the progress on my tablet as we stepped into the private elevator. "The $100,000 siphon has been reversed, and Torin's access keys have been permanently revoked. Also, I went ahead and added your $60,000 bonus to my private account while we were in the van." "Only 60,000?" he asked, stepping closer to me in the small space of the elevator. "I'm considering adding a late fee and a hazardous duty premium," I teased, looking up at him. "Accountability goes both ways, Alpha." He reached out, his hand cupping my cheek with a tenderness that made my breath hitch. The scent of cedar and frost was still there, but it was mixed with the heat of victory and the metallic tang of our shared survival. "You're not an analyst anymore, Zola," he said, his voice dropping into that dark, intimate purr. "You're the heart of this entire kingdom, and the Spire is a cold place without you." "Does the heart get a corner office with a better view?" I asked, though I was already leaning into his touch. "The heart gets whatever she wants," he promised. Chapter 26. The penthouse was quiet, save for the hum of the city 20 stories below. Malachi sat on the edge of the oversized leather bed, his back to me. I could see the dark, angry lines where the silver collar had tried to claim his life, the skin raw and weeping. "Turn around, Malachi," I said, snapping on fresh gloves and opening a new jar of healing gel. He obeyed, his stormy eyes searching mine with a raw, painful honesty. "The council wants to meet at noon. They want to formalize Torin's exile and discuss the new tax laws you proposed." "The council can wait until you've had a sandwich and at least 6 hours of sleep," I replied, applying the cool gel to his neck. "And they can wait until I've had a chance to look at the new bylaws. I don't trust them not to hide a loophole in the fine print." As I worked, the silence between us changed. It wasn't the silence of business partners or tactical allies anymore. It was thick, heavy, and hot. I pulled my hand away to reach for a bandage, but Malachi caught my wrist, his grip firm but careful. "The contract is over, Zola," he whispered, his voice vibrating in the small space between us. "The 30 days are up. You have your $60,000. You have your car. You could walk out of here right now and never look back." "I know," I said, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Are you leaving?" I looked at his bruised face, then down at the way his large, scarred hand looked against my mahogany skin. "I was thinking about the math, Malachi. A king with no one to hold him accountable is a dangerous thing for the city. It seems like a very poor business decision to leave you to your own devices. Who else is going to find the holes in your war fund? Malachi pulled me closer, his forehead resting against mine. I don't want a business partner anymore, Zola. I want a mate. I want you. I surrendered, my hands finding the back of his neck as I pulled him down. The kiss was slow, desperate, and tasted like the future we had almost lost in that warehouse. Chapter 27. The next morning, Malachi didn't go to the administrative wing. He stayed in the penthouse, wearing nothing but gray sweatpants and a clean bandage on his shoulder. He was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, holding Gus, who looked surprisingly content for a cat who had recently committed assault. "You look like a man with a very expensive plan," I said, walking into the room with 2 cups of dark coffee. "I am," he said, setting the cat down and reaching into the pocket of his sweatpants. He didn't pull out a ring. He pulled out a legal folder embossed with the gold seal of the city. "What is this? Another bonus structure?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "It's a deed," he said, handing it to me, "to that brick building on the corner of 5th and Main, the one with the original wood-fired ovens and the large front windows. I know you've been looking at it on your lunch breaks for 3 years." I froze, the paper crinkling in my hand. "The bakery? Malachi, that's—" "It cost $80,000, he said, his ears turning a bright, unmistakable shade of pink. "It's in your name. No pack strings attached. No life debts. No contracts. Just a gift from a man who really likes your peppered beef and wants to see you smile." I looked at the paper, then back at him, my vision blurring with sudden hot tears. "Malachi, I don't know what to say." "But I do have one condition," he said, stepping into my space and pulling a small velvet box from his other pocket. Inside was a ring with a single glowing amber stone that matched my eyes. "I want a permanent contract, Zola. No expiration date. I want you to be the queen of the Obsidian Spire. For real this time." "You realize I'm still going to audit your personal accounts every Tuesday morning?" I asked, a tear finally slipping down my cheek. "I'm counting on it," he whispered, sliding the ring onto my finger. Chapter 28. 3 months later, the smell of warm cardamom, browning sugar, and fresh yeast filled the air of Zola's hearth. I wiped my flour-dusted hands on my white apron and looked out the large front window. My restored electric violet 1969 Dodge Charger was parked out front, the paint gleaming under the morning sun like a jewel. Next to it, a matte black luxury sedan idled, the driver's side door opening as the clock struck 8. The bell above the door chimed with a cheerful ring. Malachi walked in, looking sharp in a navy suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. He didn't look like a grumpy, isolated king anymore. He looked like a man who had finally found the piece of him that had been missing. "Is the order ready, Luna?" he asked, leaning over the counter with a smirk. I handed him a small white box tied with a gold ribbon. "1 lemon tart, low sugar, extra zest, just the way you like it, and the invoice is in the bag." He took the box, but he didn't move to leave. He leaned across the counter, catching my scent, wildflower honey and warm clove, and let out a satisfied, heavy sigh. "How's the budget looking for the second quarter?" he teased, his hand finding mine on the marble counter. "The bakery is in the green, and the PAC's war fund hasn't lost a single cent in 90 days, I said, leaning my chin on my hand as I looked at him. "I'd say we're doing pretty well for an analyst and a king." Gus let out a loud, demanding chirp from his perch on top of the pastry display, swatting at Malachi's silk tie. "I'll see you at home, Zola," Malachi said, pressing a quick, firm kiss to my forehead. "Accountability, Malachi," I called out as he reached the door. "Don't be late for the council dinner. I already reviewed the menu." "I wouldn't dream of it," he promised. I watched him walk to his car, a smile tugging at my lips. I had walked into his office asking for a $2,000 raise, and I had walked out with a kingdom and a man who finally knew how to keep his books in order. The math finally adds up perfectly. The end. Quick favor! Don't go anywhere just yet. If you thought Zola was brave for demanding a $60,000 raise from a king behind a locked door, wait until you meet the heroine in this next story. You have to hear this disaster unfold. Click the video on your screen right now. It is totally wild.